Out of all of Nihon Falcom's games that have made it overseas, I doubt any has a more confusing legacy than their 1991 dungeon crawler, Brandish. It is somehow both a success and a failure, unforgettable and yet forgotten, timeless and yet outdated before it launched. It provided Falcom with a sales boon when the company needed it, combining classic Falcom balance with a new turn-the-world mechanic that gave the game a mock 3D world. But when Koei ported the game from the PC-98 and FM Towns to the Super Nintendo and sent it overseas, opinion was much harsher, with the game criticized for its lack of story and ugly graphics, leading to the game failing in sales and all plans to translate the sequels being dropped. Despite this, Brandish still has a very important legacy, both within Falcom and out, and has even proven influential even decades later. So what is Brandish? And if it isn't Dragon Slayer, Xanadu East, or Trails, what makes it so special to the people that do care? Let's find out. Before the game begins, we are treated to two different backstories, with more information given in the game's manual. The first is about the ancient kingdom of Berimia. The land is prosperous and the people are at peace, with a powerful dragon using his great power to keep the people safe. And a magnificent tower stands at the center of the kingdom, a symbol of that power and protection. Unfortunately, being wealthy enough and peaceful enough is not enough for the king Berebus. Consumed with greed and under the assumption that the power of the great protector should be his by right of kings, Berebus gathered his men and stormed the tower and confronted the dragon, demanding that the dragon give his power to Berebus or be destroyed. Instead, the dragon uses his power to put a mighty curse on the king, his men, and the lands below. Despite Berebus striking down and killing the dragon, it would be too late. The curse would transform Berebus into a horrifying monster before it would eventually spread, and the tower and everything around it would sink into the earth and be forgotten. Over 1,000 years later, in a story that I'm sure will in no way relate to the first one, a lone swordsman with $1 million bounty on his head learns that there are rumors of a large hole opening up outside of town. Rumors say that the pit is full of treasure and demons in equal measure, and that none who enter are ever seen again. Looking to find out more and hopefully a way to pay off his bounty, Varik travels to the pit. But before Varik can look inside, he's confronted by another bounty hunter, one with more personal reasons to want the swordsman dead. That bounty hunter is the sorceress Alexis, who not only wants the bounty on Varik's head, but also wants to torture him for his allegedly killing of her master Balkan years before. As Varik tries to escape, Alexis launches a fireball, and the resulting explosion throws both of them into the pit. Brandish proper begins with a thud, as we are treated to what might be the game's one and only use of Mode 7 as Varik slams into the ground and somehow survives. As Varik stands back up, we are given control and treated to our first impressions of Brandish's featured turn-the-world mechanic, and it is not kind. The suddenness of the perspective shift is very off-putting, with many reports of it making players sick. I'll be honest, the first time I played this years ago, my brain could not comprehend what was happening. For a few seconds, I thought the gimmick was that there were 4 different dungeons and that Varik was shifting between them. I don't know why I thought this, but I did find other reviewers that thought the same thing, so I'm at least as smart as your average Nintendo Power reviewer. If you combine Varik's slow movement with the whiplash-inducing world shifts every time you try to turn, it is no surprise that you can find all kinds of comments of players that abandon the game within the first hour, which makes it unfortunate that there is a built-in setting that mitigates this. It's just turned off by default. In the options menu, you can change whether the L button enables strafing or turning the camera. By default, it locks the world and enables strafing, but I think this is a bad idea. It slows down movement, and needing to hold down a button just to prevent the camera from freaking out is annoying, especially when in combat. With the other setting, movement becomes easier and faster, and the sudden camera shifts become easier to deal with, as by holding the button, you're almost preparing your brain for the shift. If you have not played Brandish, or if you are someone that bounced off of it, changing this setting should be the first thing you do. There's a reason I made changing this setting the first thing you see in this video. That's how important I think this is. But while that change helps the camera, there is no helping the next hurdle, which is Varik's movement. Brandish is a gritter, like Eye of the Beholder or more recently Legend of Grimrock. Although now that I think about it, that game is also a decade old. But what this means is that all movement is slow and methodical by design. You can jump to double your movement and hop over obstacles, but most of your movement will be slow, and this gets compounded with the combat system. If the game feels too slow for you, there is an option in the menu to change the game's speed. This makes everybody move a lot faster. You can also slow down the game if some bosses are being difficult. There is also an option to speed up the text crawl, and I highly recommend you do that as well. The system itself is simple. If an enemy is directly in front of Varik, he'll hold up his shield and block all attacks. By pressing the attack button, Varik will attack, but this leaves him open to damage. If there is no enemy in front of Varik, he will hold up his shield to block ranged attacks or magic. I think the potential issue here is obvious, especially if you are coming from Falcom's other games, which at this point in time, or even now, could have been Ys. In Ys, the player character is unrestrained. Adol Kristen moves so fast and freely as he pinballs between enemies, and the only thing that really matters is the initial contact. It's very fast and very fun, and at first glance, Brandish is not. While I agree that Brandish is slow, I find it more methodical than plotting, and this fits what the game is. Brandish is not an action RPG like so many Falcom games are, it's a dungeon crawler, and a key part of the grid-based dungeon crawlers is the intentional restraint of the player. Like the dungeon you are in, the walls are up, but the rules are clearly defined, and you can play however you like within those rules, and, more importantly, you can bend those rules to your own advantage. The end result is somewhat paradoxical, in that the movement and positioning matter a lot more than they first appear. Varik's mobility is an important part of the game, and it is very important that you learn and understand this. You can get behind or flank enemies to do more damage. You can outright dodge enemy attacks, either by stepping out of the way or jumping over enemies. If you time it right, you can even jump over enemy spells or projectiles. And the enemies can and will attempt to flank you as well. So while you are fighting one enemy, you need to keep a constant watch to make sure you aren't being boxed in, which is not something that really happened too often, if ever, in Ys. There is more here that I will get into in a second, but already, as is typical for Falcom, the combat is proving to be deeper and more tactical than it originally seems, and that continues into the enemy design itself. There are only 3 enemies on this first level, and each teaches the player in its own way. The first is this goblin creature that swings a sword and then stands there. Simple, but he teaches the player that while Varik can swing his weapon extremely quickly, there does need to be some care taken by the player, as Varik is vulnerable as he swings. The second enemy is this bee, which excels at being annoying, as it is much faster than the player, can move through the player, and will swarm back and forth. The trap here is that if you keep turning to catch the bee, you will be too slow and get caught in a dangerous loop. The trick is to move into a spot where the bee has to fly in front of you, take the hit, and retaliate, which shows how positioning can be just as important as raw damage, and that sometimes taking the hit is worth it to create an opening. Also, it is really satisfying to snapshot the bastard as he goes past, especially if you are unarmed. and you probably should be unarmed at first, as weird as that sounds. You see, Brandish has 2 different leveling systems at work. The first is your character level, and you level up from the experience you get from killing monsters. But leveling up your character level will only increase the amount of health and mana that Varik has. It won't actually make you any stronger. The second leveling system is a usage-based experience model that gives Varik experience every time he swings a weapon, hits with a damaging spell, or gets hit with a damaging spell, increasing his strength, intelligence, and magical resistance respectively. The experience you get is based on the level of the enemy as opposed to your own, so fighting stronger enemies will level you up faster. But you get the experience every time you hit an enemy, so using a weaker weapon more often will level you up faster. And that's why, if you want to be a man, you need to fist fight bees, a lesson that I'm sure has real-world value. But if the bees are too fast for you, there is one last enemy down here, and that's the blob, because every RPG needs to have a slime monster. This monster teaches you different tactics. It can't block, so you can try to spam attacks to take it down, but you will more than likely get hit if you do this. As it does not have any arms, you need to study its movements to determine what an attack even looks like so you know when to time your block. None of this is exactly new or groundbreaking, but this is why I say the game is more methodical in its approach. The game wants you to focus and is trying to teach you through combat experience as opposed to a tutorial. Later on, enemies may get more complex, but what you learn here will apply throughout the entire game. And this applies to more than just the combat systems, but also in how you deal with the labyrinthian levels themselves. The first map is also really good as an introduction to the non-combat gameplay mechanics, with the door levers, floor switches, and pitfalls spaced out in easy-to-spot locations so you can identify what they do, including both kinds of pits, those that hurt you and those that take you to new areas, which pairs nicely with the second floor that introduces you to the first real puzzle in the game. In this room lies death and invisible pits. Falling into one drops you into the basement. The rubble on the floor provides a clue as to where the invisible pits are located, so you can either remember the pattern as you make your way back upstairs, or use the bag of steel balls you can buy on the first floor to reveal the pits. This is a very simple puzzle. I doubt many would struggle with this, but taken as a whole, you can begin to see why the game plays the way it does. The odd design choices begin to make sense. The 3D effect makes the dungeon feel fuller, yes, but it also adds another layer to the puzzle design. Pits and levers or breakable walls can now be hidden by a wall from certain angles. Many puzzles involve timing a jump or weaving through pitfalls, and while all of this could be done with a locked camera, as we'll see, Falcom definitely did the work in making the most of this mechanic, as they did with trying to put you in the right mindset for the game. Because one thing that Brandish really excels at is setting the depressing mood that the world resides in. Everyone you meet down here in the ruins, save one, has been trapped with no hope of escape. And you can learn about this by speaking to the shopkeepers you come across. At best, they have merely accepted their hopelessness and try to live out their lives as best they can, but most are completely depressed and all have given up on any ideas of escape. On the first floor, you immediately find this man who tells you that all of his friends that he fell down here with have tried to escape and have died. In another shop, this old woman has spent her whole life down here and seen 42 different adventurers fall into the hole, and all have been eaten by the monsters. Evidently, there is a powerful energy that fills the area that, coupled with the magical water that springs from certain areas, can keep the people trapped down here alive, so long as the monsters don't get them. This has led to the survivors barricading themselves into safe houses and hardly ever venturing out except to loot weapons and money from dead adventurers and then selling that loot to whoever wanders by next. All of them will warn Varik that there is no point in trying to escape. This is what Varik needs to accept. He is going to die down in this pit, one way or another. The other warning that Varik gets is that Alexis has also survived the fall and is running ahead of Varik, having bought a powerful magic staff and several potent spells. Not only does Varik need to try to escape the pit, but deal with the bounty hunter hounding him along the way, because when it rains, it pours. I spoke earlier about how Brandish gives a really rough first impression with its peculiar controls and camera choices. But if you take the first 2 levels of the game, it makes for a really good tutorial on what the basics of the game is. By the time you make it to the exit of Area 2, you have seen the basic structure of the game, the puzzles at their most rudimentary. And if you found the fire ring on floor 2, you have even gained access to the fireball spell. It's simple, but it gives Varik a ranged attack and starts opening up your approaches to combat even more. I have seen a lot of people say that they were turned off of the game the first time they tried to move the camera, but I think that the real critical juncture for Brandish is here. It doesn't take long to get to this point. Maybe an hour. Definitely less than the magical 2-hour window that modern games try to hook you by. But if you have any interest in Brandish, or if you think the issues with the game are too much, I recommend you at least make it this far. At this point, you will know what the game is, and all of the rough edges that Brandish has will have become familiar enough. While the game gets more challenging from here, in all honesty, the most oblique challenge has already been surpassed. That of the game's own reputation. From here, everything gets better and more complex as the game throws new challenges on you, such as this Indiana Jones-style boulder trap, or adds new complications to old ideas and fun new enemies. Like these dinosaurs. Why are there dinosaurs down here anyways? Like, I appreciate the Hollow Earth truthers out there, but why? Are they training for the World Cup? Because the gameplay of Brandish is figuring out how to get through the levels, I won't go through every puzzle and floor. Instead, I want to focus on the major moments, but the ruins are full of these moments, and I think it is worth pointing out how fast and how often Brandish starts to test its own mechanics. For example, Area 5, or the Training Ground, has one of my favorite puzzles, as it shows what this game can do when it uses its established mechanics to their fullest potential. The core of the puzzle involves getting past these moving pillars. If they hit you, they will push you until they stop, usually with you falling into a pit. You can get past them by timing your movement, or jumping over the top of them, or even by intentionally falling into a pit and having the beam go over you and jumping out when the coast is clear. Moving past this first area seemingly leads to a dead end, but hidden on this wall is a lever that you would not see until you turn the world to find it. This lever activates another pillar trap that breaks a hole in the wall, allowing you to move forward. Just make sure you turn the pillar off in a position that still lets you pass by. Later on this floor, you come to the second half of the puzzle with more of the moving pillars, only this time, there is no easy way to dodge the multiple pillars without taking damage. There are more levers to pull on the other side of the wall that will turn the levers off, but as we saw before, the pillars do not automatically retract, so you need to view the other room through these windows to try to time turning off the pillars at the right moment. I really like this floor, as it serves as a microcosm of the game. You need to rely on careful timing and swift movement. You need to view the puzzle from all angles to get the information you need to continue. It's puzzles like this that justify the odd movement and camera choices. The movement is restricted, but Varik is still very agile, and while the puzzles do funnel you towards a destination, like the setting itself, What you do in those closed spaces is how you put your own style on the game, whether it's patiently waiting for an opening, going over or under the obstacles, or letting yourself take damage to find an opening, just like with the combat. Either way, the challenge is put in front of you, and you need to find your way to the exit. The exit here will lead you to another way that Brandish will test you. Occasionally, you will find areas that have special modifiers that affect the entire map. On this floor, due to some quirk of the mystical energy that floods the place, this area exists in a time bubble where the flow of time has completely stopped. What this means is that Varik cannot rest to regain health while he is on this floor. The resting mechanic is a bit of a crutch, as you can do it at any time and it fully restores your health and mana. You are at risk while sleeping, as enemies will do full damage if they find you and hit you, but it is still overpowered in the early levels where enemies can't really hit you that hard. But while the previous area solely focused on solving movement puzzles and even had a special area effect that blocked the use of any teleporting magic if you happen to have it, this area is very heavy on combat, and as such it forces you to face it. If you are too aggressive and don't learn the timing of the combat, you will either burn through all of your potions or need to backtrack to the previous area to heal. Whereas earlier areas taught you the rules, this floor aims to teach you patience. And throughout the game, you will find these more combat-oriented areas as the game tries to test you on all fronts. The other thing you will find in this area is a store. And while it does have useful items like potions if you are struggling, you can also speak with the shopkeeper to learn her story. And it isn't pleasant. The location of her store keeps her safe from the monsters outside, and the stoppage of time means that she hasn't aged a day since she came down here. But all this really means is that she lives in a gilded cage. She can't leave as she is too afraid of being killed, and everyone who ventures onto this floor gets eaten by the monsters. As she notes, she'll stay young and beautiful forever, but will also stay alone. She's too afraid of dying to notice that she isn't living, and she desperately asks Varik to stay with her so she can have any form of company, to which he leaves her behind. This is one of the main ways that Brandish tells its story, through these little snippets of conversation that you get with shopkeepers and the very few survivors that you stumble across. And most of the time, especially in the ruins, there is an overwhelming sense of depression and despair. In the ruins, everyone will commend you on surviving, but then tell you that it is pointless to keep going. No one survives down here. To seek the top of the pit is pointless. You're going to die in here, so find a hidey hole and eke out whatever form of a life that you can. All the others that were brave enough to try something to improve their lot are long since dead. Brandish, despite the people you meet, is a lonely experience. There is no invisible party here, no friends to help you out, no grand plan that you've been swept up in. Just you, alone, for so much of the adventure. And this makes the interactions with the other star of the show have the weight it needs. You saw her in the opening, and you heard of her survival in the opening area. Alexis, or Deladelin as she's named in the original, is the other driving force pushing Varik to the surface, and her presence puts a cat and mouse spin on the story as she hounds Varik throughout the game, at least in theory. In this first interaction, she calls out Varik for killing her master and threatens to kill him. She wants to kill him, but the smarter idea, to her at least, is to turn Varik in alive and get the bounty and let him be executed by the state. Besides, she might need his help to escape, or maybe to serve as a meat shield for some of the more dangerous traps. She demands that Varik surrenders, but she is too tunnel-visioned on him that she cannot see the weak floor and falls into a pit. Didn't your master teach you about spatial awareness? Oh yeah. There is a neat touch here. where this floor switch that Alexis would have stepped on sets off an arrow trap that would have hit her. You could make an argument that Varik might have noticed this, and that's why he didn't warn Alexis about the pitfall. You know, to save her. You would be wrong if you said that, but you could say that. If you follow her into the pit, you can find a note that she leaves you, taunting you. Excellent calligraphy though. Ultimately, this encounter isn't much, but it does show you that you are being hunted, and that Alexis will return. I will have more to say on Alexis later as she takes a larger role in the story. But as for the story, this area is also where you will find this odd dragon statue. What the original purpose of the statue was is impossible to tell, but it serves to show Varik the enormity of his quest, as the maze of ruins around the base of the tower is so complex as to cause a headache when Varik tries to focus on it, and that's just what it takes to get to the tower. The size of the dragon on the statue may not accurately reflect the size of the dragon of myth, but it does reflect his power. I'll be honest, it is difficult to not see the dragon perched atop the tower or think about the story of this game and not start immediately finding parallels within Nihon Falcom's history. Falcom in 1990 was in rough shape. Just 1 year earlier, nearly all of the developers that worked on the award-winning Ys series finished their work on Ys 3 and then quit. I go into much more detail about this in my Ys Book 1 and 2 video, but the short of it is that the development team grew tired of President Masayuki Kato's infamously conservative leadership style. Despite the Ys series being critically acclaimed and selling well, none of the developers were given any bonuses or pay raises. On top of this, and as was common in the industry at the time, Kato was constantly fighting with developers over who, if any, would get credit on the games. An example being that all of the musical work would be credited as Falcom JDK, and none of the individual musicians would be listed, a slight that would cause critically acclaimed musician Yuzo Koshiro to leave and create his own company, Ancient. This conservatism would even extend to which platforms the developers could work on, with Kato refusing to let anybody work on consoles or any PC platform that was not the PC-88 outside of specific or special cases. Take note of these problems. They will be coming up again, and again, and again. These problems were not just with the Ys team. Kazunari Tomi, who was the lead programmer and director of the game Dinosaur, would also leave Falcom immediately after finishing up work on the game. He left so fast that he didn't even bother to wait for the game to release. As a form of protest, Tomi defied the company's stance against credits and would put a detailed credits scene in the game. However, Kato would find out about this and would order a different traitorous programmer to remove it. I mention this as without Hashimoto's Ys team and without Kazunari Tomi, the only director left at the company was Dragon Slayer and Xanadu creator Yoshio Kiya, whose early career I also talked about in the Ys video, but at this point, his hands were full in trying to oversee all of the projects at Falcom while working on his own things. In an interview with John Shachapaniak for his Untold History of Japanese Video Game Developers series, Popful Mail programmer Jun Nagashima spoke about how alone and empty the company was after the exodus, saying, "I remember being the only person left who had been involved with Ys 3. A little while after that, Kiya-san instructed me to try to make a game for the PC-88, so I was the only one from the team, alone. And he says, 'Since you're capable of programming, why not come up with something?' But I was the only programmer left on the team and I had no graphics data to work with, so I was really at a loss as to what to do. But he said, just, fiddle around with whatever was already there at Falcom and come up with something. So I was told to make a game with no planner and no graphics designer to help me. I simply focused on creating a sample prototype by reusing existing assets from games previously by Falcom. At this same time, Kiya was trying to come up with a new game that would push 2D graphical capabilities to their limits. As long as video games had been around, developers had been chasing the idea of having three-dimensional worlds in their games. The problem was that 3D graphics were expensive, both in monetary cost and in computational cost. So many developers tried to do the best they could with using two-dimensional spaces to create a 3D effect, and with great success. However, most games still required a locked perspective, like the isometric camera in games like Ys. The idea behind Kiya's new game was that rather than the player turning the character around on a static background, the player is static and the entire world turns around the player, with this being called the turn the world mechanic. This would require 4 different versions of the game map to be loaded into memory at once, with the player swapping between them every time they turned. A lot to ask for in 1990, but Kiya and fellow programmer Yukio Takahashi were able to get a working prototype that they called Brandish. Unfortunately, they were able to get a working prototype that they called Brandish on the PC-98, the more powerful successor to the PC-88. And once President Kato saw it, he immediately demanded that Kiya and Takahashi downgrade the game to run on the PC-88, as the older computer had a bigger install base. Kiya immediately gave up on the project. He had gone through this argument before, many times before, and it was one more fight that he didn't want to have. So he told President Kato that the game would never work on the PC-88 due to the high memory requirements, and abandoned the project to finish his work on the game Lord Monarch and to start work on the Legend of Xanadu and Dragon Slayer games for the PC Engine, one of the few console ports that Kato would allow to be done in-house. Yukio Takahashi would be put in charge of finishing the project, but he would have a lucky break that would turn the fortunes of Brandish around. In 1990 and into 1991, sales of the PC-88 would fall off a cliff, as customers would make the transition to the newer and more powerful PC-98. Upon seeing this, Kato would come around and would allow Takahashi to continue to work on the PC-98 version and would bring several new faces into the company to work on the project. Yukio Takahashi would do as Kiya asked of him and would see that Brandish would be released, and then, like so many of his co-workers before him, he would leave Falcom too, and would join Yuzo Koshiro's Ancient Studios and work on the Beyond Oasis series before joining other Falcom developers at Shade. As for Kiya, he would get full director's credit on Brandish, but in his own words, he had little to do with it after he handed it off. It was very common at that time for Kiya's name to end up in credits as a way to overstate his influence and generate more sales. When Kiya was interviewed by John Suchapaniak, John pointed out to Kiya that he was listed as a director in the Popful Mail credits, and this caught Kiya completely off guard. He didn't believe it until someone showed him the actual credits listing. It seems like at this time, Kiya was being stretched way too thin, but I do want to point out that he still did everything he could to help everyone around him. When Jun Nagashima was asked about Kiya directly, he said, "During this time, Kiya-san gave me a lot of advice, and I remember him as being a very generous and caring person. Kiya-san was a famous person in the game industry back then. To me, he was almost like a god, and I didn't have the courage to just go up and chat with him. It's very presumptuous of me to say it, but I thought Kiya-san was a genius. Reviewing the programs he made was extremely instructive, and I was thankful I joined Falcom. At the time, Kiya-san was Falcom's head of development, and he was effective in his role as a leader. He was someone I could really look up to and admire. It's a bit sappy, but I like it, and it shows how Kiya was viewed as a leader. He was greatly respected by the people underneath him, and he tried to make Falcom a better place to work despite the mandates that were coming from above. But even Kiya had his limits. And one day in 1994, Kiya would try to push the envelope again and develop games for MS-DOS and Windows. Kato would shut this down, telling Kiya that releasing games on Microsoft Windows would run the company into the ground, which, based. But also absurd. Upon hearing this, Yoshio Kiya, the man who had helped build the company from the ground up, left Falcom for good. And then there was none of the old guard of developers left. Morale suffered, and many wondered if Falcom was doomed to collapse. To quote Nagashima one last time, "When Kiya-san left Falcom, I remember feeling uneasy about Falcom's future." Fight through the wreckage and you will eventually make it to Area 10, the closing area of the ruins, and it aims to make a lasting impression. After getting past this puzzle, which... we'll get to it, you'll find this young girl, or rather this ghost of a young girl, who along with her entire family was eaten by a large spider. And she's not allowed to move on to the afterlife for some reason. Another sad reminder of what life is like down here, as not even death can save you from the horrors of the pit. There's not much you can do for her at the moment, so you may as well move on and face the first boss of the game, the wizard Dink. Dink's trick is that he can teleport around the room and create illusory copies of himself when he reappears. All of his forms will shoot fireballs in front of him, and while there have been magic using enemies prior, it's doubtful the player will have leveled up their magical resistance very much, so these spells will pack one hell of a punch. Attacking the fake wizards does nothing, so you need to track down and hit the real one, which can be difficult when you get pinned down. You can dodge the fireballs with careful side-to-side movements, or by timing a forward movement very carefully. The wizard is easier to hit with a spell of your own, though he is weaker to physical attacks if you can manage to get to him in time. This fight is a culmination of everything the ruins have been trying to teach you. You need to have learned how to maneuver. You can't fight the wizard with your feet planted, and the never-ending fireballs can take you down quickly if you aren't prepared, or if the level up message blocks your healing. This is a very, very annoying bug that the game has. Every time you level up, which in boss fights will happen quickly and often, the game will not read your next button press, as it uses that next button press to make the text box go away. This can happen at the worst of moments, and it will infuriate you. But with the wizard dead, the seal on the far door breaks, and Varik can continue on. If you return to the ghost girl, you'll find that nothing has changed. There must be something bigger nearby, but before we figure that out, there is a special shop down here that is worth checking out. The woman who runs this store sells magical spells, but not just any magical spells. She sells the most powerful spells in the entire game. You won't be able to afford them, and the game tells you this up front. This is a store for you to come back to later when you can actually afford some of these spells. But you will want to come back, or at least you're supposed to want to come back. But let's be honest, Brandish has a balance problem with its spells. The first spell you get, the Fireball spell, is very useful and the workhorse of the game. The Ice spell is great, as it freezes enemies in place and opens them up for flanking attacks. But the more powerful enemies are more resistant to it, and the bosses are immune. Even if it did work better, it would still get overtaken by a later spell. Healing would be great, but I never ran out of potions. The lightning spell is your only other damaging spell, but it has no range, instead hitting every enemy around you. That can be useful at times, and it is great for killing the annoying fast enemies like the bees, but it is far too situational, and if you were surrounded, you'd be better off trying to escape. Barrier could be nice. It's supposed to increase your defense, but its duration is way too short. I also went back and tested it to see just how good it was. This enemy does 7 damage without barrier on. With barrier, it does 7 damage. With this big flame guy, he does 16 damage normally, and with barrier, he does 16 damage. I thought maybe that this was because I was flanked with the first enemy, and the big guy might be doing magic damage. So I tried to get pure damage numbers from this Viking guy, and he does a lot of damage without barrier. But when I had barrier on, it ran out before I was hit again and I died. Maybe it actually does something. Maybe it has a complex formula that doesn't work that well when you're a low level. Maybe it just sucks. I think the best way to save these two spells are to combine them. Let barrier last longer and actually work correctly, but have it cast the lightning spell when you get hit. Then it can be a real defensive option. But as is, of these lower level spells, only one, maybe two, will get much use. Now we also have a few more powerful spells that can't be found as rings. First is double magic, and it is the only one of these spells that can be found and not just purchased. Kind of. The double magic doubles Varik's strength and is very helpful in the later levels when you are fighting very bulky enemies and bosses. You may not have it for very long, but you will appreciate it. The other spells can only be bought, sort of, and two of them can only be bought here in the ruins. First is Quake Magic, which damages all enemies on screen, which is nice, and the second is Stop, which freezes all enemies on screen, and unlike Ice Magic, it can affect bosses, and there is a very difficult boss fight later in the game that is absolutely trivialized by this spell. However, despite these spells being useful, you won't use them. In all the times I have beaten Brandish, I never used them, and it is because they are found early when you can only afford them later. It's a great idea and a great way to hide potentially game-breaking spells in plain sight, but you have to remember the location of the shop, remember the spells, and assume correctly that these spells will never show up again. By the time you realize that might be the case, you're more than likely going to be too close to the end of the game that backtracking won't be worth it. The last spell, however, is a doozy.
Warp drive active.
Warp Magic. This beautiful spell burns all of the mana you have, but it lets you teleport to any previously explored tile. This greatly speeds up traversing the dungeon, and there are even treasures throughout Brandish that can only be grabbed by teleporting to them. You can now backtrack quickly if you need to, and to be perfectly honest, you can absolutely use it to brute force puzzles. But therein lies the problem. It can skip puzzles and traps and enemies. The game does make a solid effort to stop this, as there are several floors that completely prevent the use of any warp magic, and this is probably why you can only buy the spell in the caves, which is around 2/3 of the way through the game, and the spell isn't found anywhere else. Normally. Yeah, okay, I'll stop. I'll let you in on a little secret, but you need to promise not to tell anyone. Although it's a secret to everybody, so good luck finding someone who doesn't already know. In the first area of the game, Ruins Area 1, you can find this pitfall. If you fall into it normally, you will fall into an empty sub-level. But if you hold forward and the jump button as you fall, you will fall into a secret area of the sub-level. Down here, you can find one of two secret music rooms and the warp magic, right at the start of the game. I went back and forth on whether to put this information in the video here or to tack it on at the end, as having this spell this early can completely break some of the early sections that are meant to teach you how to play. It's clear that this is here as a dev item or for those who have played the game already. But if you look online, you can find many people recommending new players grab this spell, and honestly, that's not a bad idea. If the pace of the game is frustrating you, Warp will fix that. It smooths the edges and relieves some of the tedium. In this video, you can see that I grabbed the spell right at the start as well, so if you have never played Brandish, you probably should grab the spell early. But let's make a deal. If you grab the spell early on your first playthrough, try to force yourself to only use it sparingly at first. To travel back to a store if your inventory is full, or if you fall in a pit and want to get back to the area you were in quickly. The slower pace of Brandish is an important part of the mood of the game, and you should experience the game it was meant to be experienced, but it is ultimately a single-player video game, so you do what you need to have fun. Moving on past Dink, and the next area leads us to the foot of a grand tower. Ahead of you sits an old man, the first time Varik has found someone who is in hiding, dead, or trying to kill him. Unfortunately, this old man won't be doing much of anything. Like the others, he commends you for making it this far, but tells you that you can't make it any further. There is no way into the tower, there is no escape, there is no hope. This man has sat in despair for so long that his feet have been turned to stone, trapping him in place without food or water, with only the magic energy keeping him alive. If you don't want to end up like him, you can find a floor switch that reveals the home of the giant spider. Or as close as a four-legged creature can get to being a spider. Turns out old Dink wasn't the boss of the ruins, this thing is. Unlike the wizard, this monster is immune to magic damage and hits like a truck. You cannot trade blows with it if you want to survive, but its massive size becomes its own weakness, as this makes it much easier to hit in the flanks for risk-free attacks. You can't just focus on the boss, however, as it will also lay eggs that, if not destroyed quickly, will hatch into smaller versions of the boss. While they aren't dangerous, they can and will swarm you and distract you from the fight. Eventually, with dexterous movement or overabundance of potions, you will prevail and get the LMF key. I do not know what an LMF is, so please do not ask. But this key will take you deeper inside, and then dead end at this door, which warns you that it will only open if a certain seal is brought before it. If you ignore this warning, this puzzle is very vague, and there is no seal that you would have seen thus far. If you return to the old man, he'll be extremely impressed that you managed to slay the giant knot spider, but is still utterly hopeless. Some people, you just can't reach. This is what happens when you haven't had a Marlboro in 87 years. In the past, only the tower guards could get into the tower, and they were all eaten a long time ago. So once again, the way is blocked. If only we knew someone who was eaten by the giant spider thing. Wait a minute. That little girl was eaten by spiders, and her whole family too. With the beast destroyed, the little girl can finally rest, and as she departs for the great beyond, she leaves behind a golden armband that will open the way forward. With the ruins behind him, Varik enters the tower. The tower looks cool with its gothic architecture, and more importantly, it stretches up into the ceiling of the massive cave that the ruins are in. The only option Varik has is to climb, and hope it all leads somewhere. The tower brings a new look and new tunes. The tower also changes how the old traps look and adds a new wrinkle with the introduction of fake walls. There is a friendly goblin that can give you a hint about them, but you probably already figured it out by that point, or had a monster walk through the wall to spoil the surprise. The other thing the tower adds begins on the third floor. This floor is already unique in that it is completely optional. The stairs up are just around the first hallway. But if you continue on, you will find this woman imprisoned in an alcove. Knowing that so many people end up getting eaten, I don't think things were going to end well for her. Once saved, she asks Varik to save her boyfriend who is being held 2 floors below, and opens a path that leads through different areas of the previous 2 floors. In the ruins, if a pitfall sent you down a floor, it was usually just to punish you and force you to climb back up. Here is where we start to see multiple interconnected floors. It's simply done here. The later floors will become more and more connected. For now, you only have a few small hallways guarded by dogs that This is odd. I swear I just ran past them. So I don't know where all this footage comes from. Wait a second. Red hair, red clothes. Adel Kristen, is that you? Back on the first floor, you find the man locked away. He was captured down here while looking for treasure, and upon being released, he goes right back to it. His greed blinding him to the dangers and to his girlfriend's fears. The same greed that led him here keeps him here. When you return to her, she acknowledges that her lover has been blinded by gold lust, but she can't abandon him down here and runs off to find him. Since we don't ever see either of those two again, I'm going to assume that it all works out well for them. Your reward for this optional side trek is a dimensional box. This dimensional box is the second of 3. There's one in the ruins, and you would be wise to seek them all out. You can think of them as a bag of holding from Dungeons & Dragons. They greatly expand your inventory spots, although you do need to go into the boxes to retrieve things, so it's best to keep potions and spells and your thinking out of the box. With the new box, or if you just skip the whole thing, you can move up and find a hallway that continues on forever. What is really happening is that there's a hidden teleporter that is moving you backwards a la the stairway in Super Mario 64. There are many teleporter tricks in this game, and they vary greatly in how effective they are. As early as the 7th area of the ruins, you will find an entire level dedicated to these teleporter traps, and it goes all out. The actual teleportation is instant and invisible, with no clues that a change has even happened. If you just blinked, you just missed the teleport. I'm jumping in from editing to show you how subtle it really is. I'll play the clip again, but keep an eye on the treasure chest. They don't close on their own. But what you are seeing is a new chest in a similar room. I will talk in a minute about how the game uses this in its puzzles, but I want to show you now just how quick and subtle that change is. And once you notice it, it makes you very paranoid, as rooms change behind you and you never know if a door has closed on its own, which can happen, or if it was never the same door to begin with. When I talk about how this game does teleporter puzzles well, this is what I mean. It really makes you feel like there is a Lovecraftian force changing the labyrinth as you walk throughout. It's awesome. Now back to it. Where it gets devious is that you will often be put in a different room and even turned in a way as to make it seem like nothing has happened. If you aren't paying attention to your map or compass, you will end up wandering in circles. And while this could easily become tiring or tedious, I like this floor. You need to pay attention to everything around you, as while the rooms are intentionally similar, they do have minor differences. This room has a small closed-off closet, while its twin has a path that leads further in. It is near impossible to get through this floor without uncovering the entirety of the map, or at least half of it. The other half is suspiciously never used. Back on the 4th floor of the tower, you have the endless hallway that traps you in a loop until you find this magic wall. And you have this seemingly empty room. You just need to make it to the door on the other side, but of course, the room is filled with more, let's say, louder teleporter traps that very obviously take you back to the beginning of the room, forcing you to feel your way through and remembering where all of the traps were. If that sounds too annoying for you, and it kind of is, there is another room next to this one that is filled with these suspiciously human archers, and the door out opens when they are all killed, so you get to choose which challenge you want, puzzle or combat. However, for every good teleporter puzzle, there is a bad one. On the 10th area of the ruins is a massive room filled with pillars and enemies that just stand there, menacingly. The reason they never move is because the interior is filled with teleporters that throw you around the room. This would be manageable, but the sheer number of traps becomes annoying. What really ruins this is that throughout all of the traps, there is one in particular that you need to find to get the key to get out of here. So even if you find the path to the door, it means nothing if you didn't randomly guess correctly on the way in. There may be a way to work out which teleporter leads where to try to find the optimal path, but the inner maze is too repetitive in how it looks. Unlike the maze in the 7th area of the ruins, you can't discern where you are by looking closely at your surroundings. And this puzzle repeats in the tower. And even more frustrating, it repeats in an area that is immediately followed by a thief. The thief is exactly what he sounds like. He'll run into you and steal whatever item you are holding, which means he can steal your magic or healing potions, which can be pretty serious. Once the thief has your item, they will continually run away, which makes the teleporter traps even worse. The thief won't set them off, but you will. Luckily, the thief will not despawn, and he drops your item when he dies, so I was able to lure him into a narrow hallway and blind fire fireballs until the only thing left was my item bag. Once the thieves start appearing, I recommend just blind firing hallways as a precaution. Back to the teleporters. I criticized Ys for its teleporter mazes and mentioned how I have a natural disdain for them, but I will give Brandish credit for at least making an effort at making the puzzles interesting, and some are actually good, but man, when it doesn't work, it is tedium ad nauseum. But as a whole, the tower has a lot of really fun levels that play with the concepts established in the ruins. There are even levers that do nothing, just to fuck with you. Close to the end of the tower, Varik finds something we have never seen before. Another person that isn't trying to kill you and is actively trying to escape. There are clues about him earlier from a shopkeeper, and he has done well to get this far, but he can't figure out how to get past the last room in this area and was attacked by monsters while trying to figure it out. He'll give you a key you need and ask for you to return if you can get the last door open. The room in question has these push buttons laid out like a digital clock interface and a cryptic plaque telling you, you must be able to see southeast from the far door. There is no way to face southeast and the doors are straight across from each other, so I admit this one stumped me for a very long while. The answer is to make a big blocky S and E using the far door as your orientation. I go back and forth on whether this puzzle is good or not. I think it needs one more clue to help you out, as it will either take you 2 minutes or 2 hours just to figure it out. This puzzle also shows how the clues can really make a puzzle way too easy or way too hard, as the original game just asks you to write a 3 and a 5. Also, I just learned that S and E upside down is 3 and 5. Neat! If you return to Gadi the Warrior, he'll tell you that once he is well enough to continue, he will continue on and try to leave, and he gives you some strong armor as a reward. Because we do not see Gadi again, I'm going to assume that it all worked out for him. The next floor leads Varik to the top of the tower, home of illusory walls, demonic transporters, and... of course, the one time I didn't preemptively fireball a room. Alexis has been waiting, and has Varik cornered. Yeah, figures. Varik gets dropped into a room we couldn't get to before. Alexis is not so lucky. With her out of the way, the path is almost clear to leave the tower. Just a few 4-armed Rakshasas stand in the way. The Rakshasas don't take magical damage and effectively reflect the fireballs back at you, so you need to get in close and risk their attacks and being flanked. This fight is a joy, as you need to carefully dodge and counterattack one while keeping tabs on where the other one is at all times. Where previous bosses taught you patience and timing, this one teaches you to keep multiple plates spinning at once. When you eventually whittle one down, everything becomes much easier, but you better get used to dealing with multiple threats at once, as this will come up again. With the Rakshasas dead, Varik can leave the tower behind and enter the lowest depths of the caves. I mentioned earlier that it is difficult to peer through the veil and figure out who exactly took charge of Brandish's development immediately after Kiya passed it off. Still, we do know who took the reins and became Brandish's permanent caretaker: Daisuke Fujii. A man who, like Varik, I am sure has a face. I just can't find any proof of that. Because of Falcom's famous crediting shenanigans, Fujii is not credited on the original release of Brandish. However, he is on every subsequent port, but again, this could be owed to Falcom only giving either major credits or none at all. And I do believe that Fujii was involved in Brandish's early development. Regardless, after Yukio Takahashi left, Fujii was placed fully in charge of Brandish, becoming the lead director for the rest of the series and all remakes and re-releases. When Yoshio Kiya eventually left, Falcom was left without a leader for its game development division, and Fujii, having led the Brandish team and assisted on the development of The Legend of Xanadu with Kiya, was one of the two people picked to replace him. Within just 3 years, Fujii had gone from a new hire barely getting his name on the credits to being one of the most important men at the company. And with this influence, he was able to push through a new tactical fantasy game called Vantage Master, which even included Varik and Alexis as special characters, along with other famous Falcom characters. Unfortunately, none of his other games had the breakthrough success that Falcom was looking for, and many of his games never left Japan. This may not be his fault, as just by looking through his credits, you can see that nearly all of them are sequels to the established Brandish series or ports. This was another of President Kato's infamous demands. The more Falcom struggled in the 90s, the safer Kato wanted to be, and remastering and porting older and already established games was, to Kato at least, the safest option. Unfortunately, this was also an option with diminishing returns and an option that stifled any creativity. If you look at Vantage Master, and jumping ahead a little, if you take into account that after leaving Falcom, Fujii would become responsible for creating the battle systems in Skies of Arcadia, and then turn around and become one of the designers on Dead or Alive 3, it becomes clear that Fujii was a developer who wanted to make new and different systems for his games, and that he wanted to work on consoles, and it was clear that that wasn't going to happen at Falcom. So, in 1999, Fujii and several other high-ranking talent left. Fujii was able to get into Falcom and make his way up the ladder quickly due to the mass Falcom exodus in 1989, and he would be the cause of a second mass Falcom exodus in 1999. Despite all of his efforts, he climbed the Falcom tower only to find that the problems just kept going from there. From the top of the tower to the bottom of the caves, and it's still a long way to go from here. Although a lot of neat things happen in the caves, despite the fact that it begins with disappointment. Technically, it has a new tile set, but it looks too much like the ruins to be exciting. But what is exciting is the underground lakes you can find and the stone hopping puzzles they have. You are locked to the stone when you hop on it and can only jump off, so the puzzle is finding the correct path. It's not difficult, although those goddamn bats that hound you throughout can get really annoying. Along the way, you will find Nixie, the water sprite who is responsible for the magical properties of McDonald's Sprite and the spring water that keeps the lower inhabitants alive. Unfortunately, as we learn from a shopkeeper nearby, the local monsters have been trying to force her to leave, and Nixie will confirm this by saying that the monsters are trying to stop the flow of the stream further up the cave. Since it seems like this magical spring is the only thing keeping the people below alive, this is a serious problem. The next floor up, we can find the floodgate in a room kindly marked Floodgate. Keep out. Who is this sign for? Does this actually work? By defeating the two knights inside, you can flip a switch to free the spring water. If you return to the sprite, she will ask the gods to give you favor and swears to repay your kindness in the future, and gives you a hint on how to progress to the next floor. Nixie will pop up again in an odd encounter, but while her role in this game is brief, I do like how Nixie provides a brief glimpse at a greater world and history with her presence and the mention of gods, and also shows how the greed-corrupted monsters are hoarding the few resources that are available in the pit, and intentional or not, they risk destroying the main lifeline to all of the people living beneath them. We meet back up with Nixie on B6, where Nixie thanks you for finding the magical armor at the bottom of the spring, which is awesome because that did not happen. As a reward for this, Nixie gives you the Armor of Flames, the 4th strongest armor you can find, but the 3rd best in most areas. So while I have no idea what she is talking about, I'm not going to correct her. Obviously, this confusion is a mistranslation, and I assume she is supposed to say that she found the armor at the bottom of the spring after you left her. Still, you get the armor just in the Nixie of time, as shortly after there is a mini-boss area that combines powerful enemies with a puzzle room. The area has Medusas. Medusae? Medusi? Roaming around and scattered throughout are several invisible teleporters that will turn Varik to a random direction. These are designed to run you in circles and get you lost, enhancing the labyrinthian feel, but they will also completely screw you over if you wander into one while fighting a Medusa. The Medusa is dangerous because she can, like the myth, cast a spell on you that will freeze you solid. It's game over if this happens, as the Medusa will just beat you to death afterwards. So drive-by tactics work best. After you defeat the Medusi, or really at any time, you can take the stairs in this area and leave. But if you've been exploring the area, and you should, you can find a long hallway filled with deadly blade traps and uncover a prison holding this woman captive. If you talk to her, she'll tell you that the Medusi imprisoned her and hold the key to let her out. They didn't, but if you go back, you will find that all of them have respawned and you get to fight them again. They will only drop the key after you talk to the prisoner, which, sure, I appreciate that there are measures that prevent you from locking yourself out of completing this quest, but why not just have the Medusi drop the key anyways? Return with the key and you can get your reward as the beautiful and grateful woman asks you to turn around so she can prepare herself. Oh. I knew this was a PC 98 game, but I didn't know it was one of those kind of games. Oh. Turns out the pretty lady is actually a shape-shifting spider, and probably the true unsung hero of The Lord of the Rings. Alas, we have no tricksy hobbits to offer in our stead, so we have to kill her. Like the Medusi, the Spadusi will squirt sticky webs on Varik and trap him in place. You're not totally trapped, and if you spam the attack button, you can wriggle free, so rapidly spam the attack until you defeat her. Your reward is the Armor of Darkness, which is statistically better than the Flame Armor, but it has a catch. A big one. The armor is possessed, and if you put it on, you will be locked in place and unable to open your inventory for a while, so for now it is useless, but don't pitch it just yet. The next floor up has a shop with a very jovial man who tells you that there is a pepperoni secret area hidden behind a magical wall, though he doesn't know if that is true or not. It turns out it is true if by magical wall you mean can be destroyed by a giant hammer, which means I also have magical walls in my house. This secret path leads all the way back down to a hidden part of B7 that is full of Medusi. And fireball shooting wizards. There are more treasures down here, but the best one lies on this island that we can get to by pressing a switch that is behind this fake wall. Wait, is this the magic wall? Am I the asshole? On the island is a large pillar, and the message is, "Those who crave wealth will not find the path," and "To those who are lost, seek thyself." If you are confused, me too. The answer is to activate the sign instead of reading it, but I only solved that by accident when I tried to reread the sign without holding the L button. How you get that from the message is, you don't. Those are for the next step. In the chest that you find lies the third dimensional box, but by taking it, the rock leading to the island disappears. You need to leave something valuable behind in the box. That is a nice puzzle that will return later, but I want to show that Brandish really struggles with giving hints to its puzzles. Maybe it's from the translation and it works better in Japanese, but the fact that there are 2 hints given for a puzzle with 2 parts and neither deal with the mechanic that hasn't been used before is bad. There's no other way to put it. I admit that I can see why they would want you to deal with a rather challenging puzzle for something as valuable as a dimensional box, but there has to be something better than this. Although you can cheese the second half of this puzzle, as this floor is also where you can buy the warp magic. You don't need to solve the second part, just grab the box and warp away, and make the long trip back to B5. At least you'll have good music to listen to along the way. Another notable thing about the caves is the backing track. It's really good, as is most of the music in Brandish. A lot of the ambient tracks on the earlier levels give a somber tone to the adventure that help with the melancholic atmosphere, and the later floors get a more driving beat as the tension escalates. Each boss also gets their own unique song, as does every encounter with Alexis. There's also this. Whatever this is, this sound that plays when you defeat a boss. It sounds like a hyperdrive firing up in Star Wars, but it does sound neat. If I had a complaint about the music, it would be that there is only 1 song per area. You will be hearing the Ruins theme a lot. It's good, but it needs to carry several hours of gameplay, and no one song can really do that. But it isn't for lack of effort. I feel that these tracks do an admirable job of accentuating the mood. Some other personal favorites of mine are the Stage Clear theme, Alexis's theme, and the ending themes. The sound and music for Brandish was composed by the 2-person team of Mieko Ishikawa and Atsushi Shirakawa. Anybody coming here from my previous video on Ys Book 1 and 2 will recognize the name, but if not, Mieko Ishikawa had been a composer at Falcom dating back to Ys 1 in 1987, and not only wrote music for the game, but also handled a lot of the back-end production necessities, such as figuring out how to port the soundtrack to smaller and less capable systems. By this point, Ishikawa was one of the leading composers at Falcom and the leader of Falcom JDK, the name given to the collective group of Falcom composers. Once again, she also played a major role in translating the music in Falcom games to other systems, and she would also do this here, overseeing the job of porting the PC-98 base soundtrack to the FM Towns, the PC Engine, and the Super Nintendo. In 1997, Ishikawa would move into full-on producer role at Falcom, and while she may not compose music for the Falcom games anymore, she is now responsible for overseeing all of the musical efforts at Falcom. In fact, in an interview with John Suchapaniak, Joseph Reedon of the Japanese Game Preservation Society would claim that at the time, Ishikawa was the second strongest person at Falcom after Masayuki Kato, and even claim that she owns nearly 1.5% of the company. She's even responsible for directing the official soundtracks and overseeing their releases, but I'll get to those in a second, as I want to mention the second composer, as he had a very interesting career, and may be the better known of the two. The second composer was Atsushi Shirakawa, though he is better known by a different name now, which I'll get to in a second. Shirakawa fits the classic mold for Falcom and the team that worked on this game. He was very young, having joined Falcom fresh out of high school by submitting a few songs that would end up in the game Lord Monarch. From there, he was moved to Brandish, which would be his first major work. In an interview with VGM Online, Shirakawa provided some insight as to what the musical process looked like. Evidently, there was very little collaboration between the artists. You were placed onto a project and given a list of needs from the developers. This list was divided up amongst the composers, and each musician made the songs on their own and submitted them back to the developers. This can explain why, while the songs are good and fit a general theme, some of them don't seem to fit with the others. After his work on Brandish, Shirakawa would go on to compose music for many other Falcom games and would provide a lot of the music for the Legend of Heroes series, and would state that he found his work on The Legend of Heroes 3: The White Witch to be his most fulfilling work. More on this game later. It would turn out that his work on the Legend of Heroes series would have a profound effect on his career, as during the development of The Legend of Heroes 5, Shirakawa would work closely with animator Makoto Shinkai on the opening animation for the game. This would mark the beginning of a close friendship between the two, and in 1999, when Shinkai would make his debut animated short, She and Her Cat, he would ask Shirakawa, who by this point was going by his better-known moniker Tenmon, to compose the soundtrack. They would collaborate many times over the next decade, as Tenmon would leave Falcom in the early 2000s to expand his work to animation and solo projects. And as for his friend, Shinkai, his award-winning animated films would explode in popularity and critical acclaim, with his most recent Disaster trilogy bringing in nearly $1 billion. And the first film, Your Name, would eventually pass Hayao Miyazaki's Spirited Away to briefly become the highest-grossing Japanese film of all time. And both of these men got their creative starts at Falcom, and with Tenmon, it was here with Brandish. If you have any interest in the soundtrack, Falcom has released the official soundtrack a couple of different times. The Perfect Collection, Brandish, released in April of 1992, contains 25 of the game's tracks along with stylized remixes of the ending and Fortress themes. The Fortress remix is very good, although it absolutely does not fit the theme of the game. Do you think this is what is playing in Varik's head the whole time? Like, everybody else is mad 'cause sad, but Varik is just here to dance. Aside from that, this is probably the purest soundtrack that you can get and sounds like a richer form of the PC-98 sound. In October of 1994, Falcom would also release the Brandish Piano Collection, where 10 of the songs were redone with a solitary piano. This album is great and really hammers home the moody and sad nature that the game has, unlike the Masters of Funk version. Finally, in March of 2009, to coincide with the release of Brandish The Dark Revenant, Falcom would release the FM Towns and Renewal soundtracks. Mieko Ishikawa oversaw the work on these collections personally and reportedly worked very hard on making them. And I think that shows, especially on the Piano Collection, as many of those songs are not trying to copy the soundtrack perfectly, but trying to recreate the mood that the original songs were going for. The weird thing about all of this is that, unlike with the financials or development, when it came to the music, Kato wasn't a Philistine. In fact, he was heavily invested in it. Throughout his career, and even in his later days when he had to slow down, Kato would still give interviews where he would talk about how he was heavily invested in the musical side of things at the company. After his passing in late 2024, the current president of Falcom called the reorganization of the musical production side of Falcom as being the company's greatest challenge due to how intimately involved Kato was. For all of the good things that have come out of Falcom JDK, The compilation CDs, the remixes, the concerts. Kato has been there pushing it forward, which is odd, as it was his management style that pushed so many out of the company, including in the musical department. In my East video, I spoke about how Kato's decision to have all of the music credited to Falcom's sound team as a whole as Falcom JDK, and how this frustrated one of the composers on East, the very talented Yuzo Koshiro. Koshiro hated how he would put a ton of work into a game and would never see his name listed in the credits. A fair point to make, and he would leave the company after finishing his work on East 2 because of these frustrations mirrored by many of the developers around the company. In an effort to be fair, I do want to point out that Atsushi Shirakawa has stated that he preferred to be credited as a group, as he did not want fans to hold any one composer above all the others and to stifle any internal conflicts over who did more work than someone else. I do see the point he is trying to make. I also mentioned in my East video that big-name composers, such as Yuzo Koshiro, can often suck the air out of the room and make it harder for people to notice the other composers working on a title. Plus, if the music was created as a group, it does make sense for the group as a whole to be credited. We see this in the major music industry, with bands having and being known by their own name. However, even within that structure, individual artists are credited for lyrical and songwriting purposes, and the individual band members are still credited if they want to be. I think that is the sweet spot that would have helped here. Just put all of the composers' names under a Falcom JDK banner and move on. I assumed that this was something that Falcom would have ended up doing, but I went back and watched the credits on the Nintendo Switch version of East 8 Lacrimosa of Dana, and I could not find any musical credits. Maybe I missed it, as they scroll pretty fast at times, but I was looking for it and didn't see it. I did see a special thanks to Nintendo, so that counts. Maybe things haven't gotten better, but still, it is amazing the amount of musical talent that has passed through the halls at Falcom, and both Kato and Ishikawa deserve some credit for both finding this talent and letting them grow. And they have left their impact on Brandish. The music is great. Even if you don't like the game, I recommend you track down the soundtracks. Back in B5, the path onward will eventually circle back around, making a large donut with nowhere to go. But if you've been thorough, you can see where there is an unexplored open wall, a telltale sign of an invisible wall. This was the magical wall the shopkeeper was talking about, and I am the asshole. The switch inside leads to the center of the room and the stairs up. The next floor is very small, and B3 is as well, as, like before, these floors and B2 are linked together. Like the tower, the floors of the cave are more interconnected, often with multiple stairways, or, as we saw earlier on B7, giant holes, complete with an old lady who asks if you've seen said big hole. Falling into these holes will lead you to unexplored areas of the previous floor, as we saw in the tower, but now they are becoming required for progress. They also help showcase the massive scale of the caves you are in. Some of these areas have drops that can be multiple stories in size, which really adds to the atmosphere when you are jumping across the small pillars to cross with more of these goddamn bats that can knock you out of the air. I also want to jump in and add that there is a nice touch of map building with the water in the cave. If you look at the maps of all the cave levels, you can see that Falcom made all of the water areas in the cave follow some sort of logic. The areas in the upper right corner where the water appears most often on the higher levels is directly above the area where the spring that was blocked off is located, showing that the pressure from the spring is pushing the water upward. There is also a major underground river located directly above the massive lake where Nixie is located. If the cave was fully modeled, I'm sure that you would find a waterfall in this area filling the lake beneath it. This doesn't really do anything, but I think this is cool. It shows that there was a lot of care put into realizing this space as being a real world, as opposed to just making maps for gameplay. Near the end of this floor, we head down a hallway and... yes. She must have passed us as we were pit diving earlier. There are no more games. Alexis has had it. None of Varik's famous sweet talk will get him out of this one. But that boulder will. Alexis is... No. Not yet. Somehow, Alexis has survived and moved on. So shall we. The top of the caves is relatively straightforward, although there are now tough chimera enemies to fight, and there is another puzzle room that locks you in if you leave any of the treasure chests open. That's it. You don't need to replace anything, just tidy up when you're done, or, just teleport. But after, you find a man moments from dying who warns you about the tough monster in the next room. And it's a good warning, as the next room holds the boss of the caves. The ninja boss, and you'll probably end up like your friend before too long. The ninja is very tough, and he isn't afraid of spamming endless shuriken from a distance. He can hit really hard with his sword if you can get in close, and he has a nasty trick up his sleeve. If you do hit him in melee, he can jump backwards and create a double. The double hits just as hard and looks identical, and with two of them, they will try to flank you constantly. The best option is to use fire magic and guzzle health potions, or retreat to heal in a safer area. I really like this fight. It's tough, and the ninja has a lot of health, which makes the fight take a while. And the ninja also has few weaknesses that you can exploit. He can outdamage you if you try to fight him at range, he can outmaneuver you if you get in close. While the other bosses in Brandish are more about finding a specific pattern that works, realizing that you are either stronger or faster than they are, the ninja is someone who is faster and stronger than you. While you can cheese this fight, and every fight for that matter, with the invisibility potions or the time stop magic, without those, he's someone that you just have to beat and wear him down faster than he can beat you down. It's an endurance fight. Eventually, the ninja boss will fall and unlock the path out. But if you continue on with this floor, you can find a different ninja, with less health, but still very dangerous. And past him is a new sword, the Muramasa Blade. This is the third strongest weapon in the game, but all of them that you find, save one, are very fragile. Luckily, Brandish has an item that restores a weapon's durability in the form of hardening potions. They are very expensive, but you can find them hidden all over the place. So hopefully you haven't been wasting them on your short sword collection. So we've made it out of the cave, and have stepped into the Shadow Realm. You think Miyotoko's in here? I bet he gets up to all kinds of weird shit in here. The Dark Zone is dark, obviously, and that comes with some major annoyances later, but you can get a taste of that now. The floor is pitch black and gives you no hint if there's a pitfall trap even after you fall in. They do still show up on your map, so if you can't remember where they are, you can still check your map to remember. You do have one thing going for you. This is the only area where you can wear the darkness gear, which is way better than anything else you could have at this point. Which is good, as the enemies here can be pretty nasty. There are only two different types, but they work really well together with their hammer and anvil tactics. The Shadow Knight types like to close you down, and they can take a bit of a beating, but that will distract you while these squiggly masses open you up with fireballs from a distance. As always, movement is key, but since you will be focused more on the enemies than your map, it makes you more likely to fall in an invisible pit, and possibly the same pit multiple times. The floor plan is wide open, although I don't know if that helps as there aren't many landmarks to get your bearings, so just make your way to a far wall and head for the corners. On opposite ends of the first floor are hidden rooms containing glowing switches that will activate a teleporter taking you to the second floor. That sounds simple and easy, and it is. Think of it as a rest before the real challenge. Because the second floor is where the real fun begins, as there are invisible pits everywhere, and each one will take you back to the first floor. This is complicated by the fact that the floor is a maze. The only option is to constantly bring up the map to see where the pits are. Take a step, map. Take a step, map. Throughout the entire floor. And there are necessary keys hidden throughout, and even a secret hidden wall, because why not? The Shadow Zone is only these 2 levels, and there is no boss fight, and this is the only area where Alexis will not appear. It's just you and the maze, with several different Lovecraftian monsters flittering about in the darkness. The only real test is of your patience, and a test that is, as this is probably the most frustrating of all of Brandish's areas. It seems every part of it is designed to annoy you. Thankfully, this area is mercifully short, with only the 2 floors to get through, but I'm sure that most players, myself included, will find that to be more than enough. There is another secret on the second floor that makes for a great reward for putting up with this. If you turn around right before the exit, you will find a long path that leads you to a lot of gold and a secret sound room. So take a break and enjoy the music. The Dark Zone is done, and one final push is all that remains. Now, what exactly the Dark Zone is a mystery. While there are many mysteries around Brandish's development, it is safe to say that the bulk of the story work was done by Mr. Tadashi Hayakawa. Hayakawa got his start as a writer by writing and pitching various screenplays for different anime shows. I can't find any record of Hayakawa finding success before 1989, but in that year, Falcom would take a chance on Hayakawa and let him pen the screenplay for their upcoming OVA based on Ys. The Ys anime wouldn't blow anybody away critically, but it was well received by fans of the series, and that was good enough for President Kato to bring Hayakawa into the game development side of Falcom to write backstories for the games. The first game he would get a chance to work on would be Brandish, creating the world and setting in which the game would take place. The backstory of Berebus and the prologue leading to Varik and Alexis falling into the pit were more than likely his creations. And while these stories will not blow anybody away with their masterful storytelling, there are a few things about them I really like. For starters, there's a very interesting twist on the tale of the dragon Dahaka, but I'll get into that later as it incorporates my view on the plot of the game as a whole, but the actions of the ancient king and his lust for power have had a cascading effect that has led to the nearby lands being trapped in a cycle of destitution that is exacerbated by the current ruler's greedy machinations. The world that Varik and Alexis live in is one where the rule of law chases profit instead of justice. A common enough trope for a story, but what I really like about this is how Varik responds to living in this world and what that says about him and Alexis. He has a $1 million bounty on his head, the highest bounty in the land, but no one wants to collect it because Varik has also gained a reputation for his ruthlessness. He is cold and efficient, and it is implied that he has killed many who have tried to collect that bounty. But Varik doesn't seem to revel in his own reputation, nor is he saddened by it. It's just a fact of life for him. He kills because he has to protect himself, nothing more. Which is interesting considering the fact that the crime that he is accused of is not one that he committed. The story clearly states that Varik is innocent of his crime, but we never hear him protest this fact. Not to the people in the bar that are afraid of him, and not to Alexis, who is the only person that is unafraid of Varik, because the situation is personal for her. Varik is aware of one simple fact of life. It doesn't matter if you are innocent if you can't afford to be innocent. There's no sense in arguing this. But once you understand where the walls are, you can learn how to circumnavigate them. Like Varik, Hayakawa was entering a Falcom that was already being undone. The very same people who created the work that inspired his first project at Falcom were already gone. The main people that Hayakawa was supposed to work with on Brandish, Kiya, and Takahashi were being pulled in several directions at once and were already half out the door. Budgets were shoestring and ludicrous demands were being made. It was a forge that would melt just about anyone. But Hayakawa, like Daisuke Fujii, thrived. While he would continue his work writing the story and scenarios for the Brandish series, he would also write the story for The Legend of Heroes 3: The White Witch, which would become one of Falcom's seminal works of the 1990s. Afterwards, Hayakawa would be promoted and would have a hand in nearly all of Falcom's output, from Revival Xanadu to Vantage Master to East 5, but we don't talk about that one. While still writing the stories for the Legends series, Hayakawa and Fujii were the two main people who oversaw Falcom's gaming division. Unfortunately, this also meant that they were the ones most affected by President Kato's demands. While the personal thoughts of the developers become impossible to find in this era, you can imagine that the same issues that pushed out everyone else, with the steady slew of ports and remakes stifling new ideas, that eventually it would catch up to Hayakawa as well. The man whose career slowly went from that as a writer to that of a supervisor. For a man who had received critical praise for his work on the Legends series to now be told to sit back and watch as the company pumped out a third version of someone else's story must have been a bitter pill to swallow. Falcom was heading in a direction where Hayakawa wasn't needed anymore. And finally, in 1999, despite all the efforts to change the nature of Falcom, Hayakawa had had enough and walked out of Falcom with Fujii, leaving Falcom leaderless once again. Hayakawa's career in the video game industry didn't last much longer, but he didn't stop writing. Shortly after leaving Falcom, he went back to writing scripts for anime TV shows, including several episodes for none other than Yu-Gi-Oh!
It's time to do.
So while I don't know what the Dark Zone is, I do know where the Shadow Realm leads. Welcome to the Fortress. I don't know what it is, or maybe I don't know who it is, but this is where every small part of the game comes together, and where the toughest challenges are. Your first sign of things to come are the glowing dots on the floor that eat away at your health, and the two shops near the entrance. As they tell you, they are the last normal shops in the game, and every floor from here on out is jammed with all of the toughest enemies from before. The Headless, the Chimera, the Ninja. Also, every floor has a special challenge. The first involves these switches that move pillars around, and you have to find the pillar that does not move. The second floor is very winding and full of locked doors, but when you find the lever that opens them, it also releases all of the enemies, including these magic eyes that actively erase your map as they move around, which means that you need to track them down quickly. There's a nice bit of cosmic horror with them that I like. If the map is what Varik remembers exploring, then that means that these eyes are actively eating his memories. Neat! The third floor brings back the Rakshasa, the suspiciously sexy spider ladies, and introduces the succubi, which cast spells that drain your mana. They can't actually hurt you in any way though, so if you manage to corner them, you can beat them to death with a broken hilt if you want. They can't stop you. I'm starting to wonder if maybe Alexis had a point. Let's move on to the next bit, which is a floor switch puzzle. These switches need to be pressed in a specific pattern, or a pit will appear in front of the door and drop you back down a floor, where a plaque will give you a hint on the specific movements you need to make to pass. This is a really fun use of the grid-based mechanics, and I wish there were more puzzles like this. But this isn't the real puzzle of this floor. That is when you are told to light the 5 lanterns to make a land skin bridge appear. Sounds easy, but of course they're hidden in a teleport maze, and the worst one I've yet seen in a Falcom game. I won't say the worst one in a Falcom game because I have full faith that they can outdo even this. But as the teleporters are all right next to each other, you will have to go 3 or 4 inception layers deep just to find a space to turn around and go back through them so you can hit a different teleporter and do it all again. I hate it. The best advice I can give is that the warp spell can help skip some of these sections. Good luck, Godspeed, and watch out for the Rakshasas that hang out in here. If you make it through, though, the rest of the game really picks up. The entirety of the 4th floor is the puzzle, as the rooms are all small squares, but different door placements and pits will block your movement, so finding your way around is tricky. There are also 2 new enemies. The first is the haunted remains of the king's retainers. They ignore magic, so you have to sword fight them, which sword fighting Samurai Ghost is awesome. But on death, they will always leave their powerful sword behind, and one of them will drop the second best armor in the game, the Ancient Warrior's Armor. The second new enemies are the Mimics. As usual, they disguise themselves as treasure chests and chomp at you when you get too close. There hasn't been a reason to be wary of the chests throughout the game, so this will probably kill you the first time you find one, and as far as I could see, there is no tell that a chest is real or not other than throwing a fireball at every chest you see to find out if you are damaging something, as real treasure chests can't be destroyed. Finally, as the whole floor is the puzzle, in place of a grand puzzle is the mini-boss fight of Varik versus 3 lobsters. Granted, the lobsters are huge and can more than likely kill you in 2 hits. Think of this fight as a much more dangerous version of the fight with the Rakshasas, only the enemies are bigger and the area you fight in is smaller. Like most bosses, the key is constant movement and trying to hit the bosses from the side when you can. If you get too focused on one, the other 2 will try to flank you with their pincer tactics. The boss has a hellacious inverted difficulty curve as it gets easier once you defeat one of them, and I would love to show you this, but I lost the footage. But believe you me when I say you would have lost your minds with my gamer skills. Instead, enjoy me doing the fight on the PSP version. It's close enough. There is something about the idea of the bosses here being giant lobsters that I really like. It's clear that the artists behind Brandish were drawing inspiration from unusual spaces, and there are several enemies that are based on deep-sea creatures or various crustaceans. It's an odd choice that helps the pseudo-Lovecraftian vibes that the last 2 sections of the game have. And have you ever really looked at a lobster? They're terrifying. This is further proof that we don't belong in the ocean. There are things down there that we don't want to see. You know what? Let's not look at that anymore. Instead, just look at the map of this floor. They really crammed everything into every last bit of space. And it's about to go further with the next 3 floors. These floors are completely interconnected, full of more lobsters, fire-shooting octopi, a black market run by a goblin, a puzzle that involves falling through multiple floors to land on a switch, the star shield, the soul armor, and the double magic spell. Here are the maps for these 3 floors, and each connects to the other 2 in multiple ways, turning this into a labyrinth worthy of the name. I love this part. It is easily my second favorite part of the game, as everything feels tough, mentally taxing, but fair. You know you are near the end of the game, and this is Brandish's last attempt to give you an exploration challenge, and it makes the most of it, and it forces you to explore every last section, as there are several keys that you need to find, and you won't use them till the very end. And if you are missing one, all you get is this mocking plaque and a teleporter that takes you all the way back to the start for a very long walk of shame. There is one more developer I would like to mention, and he might be the one person who is most responsible for how this series of games grew and how they run and play throughout the years. Although somewhat paradoxically, you won't find his name very easily with casual searches about Brandish: Takayuki Kusano. Like most Japanese programmers of this era, nailing down specifics is difficult, but it seems like Kusano started at Falcom in April of 1991, and while he may have helped out with Popful Mail, his first major project was Brandish. Like Varik plummeting into the ruins and so many others who worked on this game, Kusano would have been entering a company that was in the process of losing 2/3 of its developers. Everyone knew that things were bad, and everyone that had tried to make things better were gone or on their way out the door. At one point, Falcom seemed destined for greatness, but now they were just trying to survive and find anything to hold on to. And in Japan, Brandish provided that. It was a success, and while it didn't reach the heights of Dragon Slayer or Ys, it was popular enough to get 2 more direct sequels in 1993 and 1994, with Kusano working on all of them, followed by the console ports beginning in 1995 and a 4th game in 1996 with new characters. But unlike many of the developers on Brandish that would get fed up with Falcom mostly focusing on ports and remasters in the late 90s and leave, Kusano would stay at Falcom and move up the internal ladder, becoming a director on several key series where he would cross paths with another important figure in Falcom's history, Yoshio Kondo. And while Kondo does not have a direct connection with early Brandish, I think it is important to mention as it shows the legacy that Brandish has. To quickly summarize a long and successful career, Yoshio Kondo loved The Legend of Heroes 3: The White Witch and wanted to work for Falcom, and he would get his start working on the website side of the company, occasionally helping with some of the documentation of games before eventually being moved over to the development part of the company to assist in the Windows port of Legend of Heroes 3. But as with many of the developers working at Falcom, Kondo also grew tired with working on ports and remakes. So after the success of the Ys 1 and 2 remakes for Windows, Falcom decided to finally take a chance and make the first new Ys game in 8 years with Ys 6 in 2003. Kondo would be the scenario writer under the supervision of director Takayuki Kusano. The game would be another hit and is remembered as being the game that revitalized the Ys series and helped to stabilize Falcom and put the company in a position to move out of their slump. Kondo has stated that he often relied on the older, more experienced staff to help, and that would suit him well when, in 2007, Kondo would become the new president of Falcom. As for Kusano, the director that helped guide the revival with Ys 6, he would go on to do programming work for another smash hit, Legend of Heroes: Trails in the Sky, the first of the Trails series, which has now surpassed Ys in popularity and, with Ys, has fully led Falcom's revival. Now, Kusano has his thumbprint on every major Falcom project, being the director on the Trails and Ys series. Whether you love his work or not, you cannot deny that he has major influence within the recent successful years at Falcom. And he got his start here with Brandish, when Falcom was at its lowest. After the Labyrinth is the top of the fortress, and the last real level of the game. You even get some nice words of encouragement at the start. This is where it all comes to a head, starting with this message from Alexis, where we find out she has stolen the key that lets us out of this hellhole, and that she is the kind of person that writes out her own maniacal laughter. She won't get very far with the key of truth and lights, as you'll quickly run back into her, locked in a deadly battle with a Rakshasa. And here is where you get to make the only choice in Brandish. Do you save Alexis? You'll get the key either way, and Alexis really hasn't given you any reason to want to help her. But I'd be lying if I said she didn't grow on me throughout the game. And that's a sign of weakness, so I struck her down myself. My only regret is that I wasn't the person that killed your master. I'm just kidding. I think it's finally time. Let's talk about Alexis. I know that in a lot of reviews, Alexis, or Della Dellan as she is known originally and in later versions, is mocked for being nothing more than comic relief, the attractive idiot that falls in obvious traps for a cheap laugh. But I feel this does her a disservice. Her anger at Varik for killing her mentor, whether justified or not, hints at a greater and darker story that exists outside of the pit, but also explains why she acts the way she does. We know from the fact that she is able to follow Varik throughout the dungeons and even get ahead of him on multiple occasions that she is clearly capable and powerful. But she lacks control, which is fitting for someone that couldn't complete their training due to their master being killed. That she cannot keep her anger in check when confronting Varik makes sense. I would even go so far as to say that in many other stories, the student with boundless potential, whose training gets cut short and then sets out to avenge their fallen master, would be the main character. In Brandish, you are playing as the villain of her story, down to you narrowly escaping every time she seemingly has you cornered. And if you choose to spare Alexis at the end, she even gets the conclusion of her own character arc. Depending on how you want to read into her sparing Varik's life at the end of the story, it could be her finally coming to terms with the fact that Varik may be innocent, or at least not as guilty as she previously thought. I do want to add that I know that the later games flesh out the backstory as to what Varik actually did with Alexis's mentor, but for the sake of this video, I'm only focusing on what we learn in this game, as this was the only game in the series to be translated officially, and that's the only game that most people over here actually got to see. Outside of the story, Alexis became the breakout star of Brandish. She appeared on more covers than Varik ever did, and even made guest appearances in other Falcom games, such as Vantage Master. It would be easy to say the root of this popularity was her outfit, and I won't insult anybody by saying that it wasn't, but blonde bikini-clad or BBC women in video games are a dime a dozen, and I do think that Alexis has a lot more going for her than a passing glance may show. If not, I don't think she would have had an ever-increasing role in the Brandish story as the games went on, and I don't think that fans would have been as heartbroken when she was left out of Brandish 4. Alexis is the sharp contrast to Varik. She is pale and revealing to his dark hair and shadow, arcane power to physical strength, the vocal relief to his silence. Even her music is frantic and chaotic, compared to the more melancholic tones for Varik. You can even see this in the official artwork that Alexis is portrayed in, like in the FM Towns OST album, where Varik is obscured, his scarf tattered, and his leg torn and bleeding, whereas Alexis is bright, exposed, and almost ethereal. or in the Brandish piano collection, where Alexis is giving a sexy pose and nearly falling out of her outfit, yes, but she's also very bright and pops against a black background, and the slight tilt of her eyebrow and faint smile hint at a more charming aspect of her personality that you may not always get to see, as opposed to Varik's face that is always obscured in shadow, but Varik does not hide anything. What you see is what you get, and I think these contrasts are intentional. And speaking of that outfit, you can't talk about the English version of Brandish without mentioning the censorship that happened with the translation. Along with the name change came an outfit change, as Alexis ditched the bikini for a leotard. To be clear, this is censorship and a forced change of the artist's original intent. Aside from that, I have to admit that I like the new outfit better. You have to understand that I have a soft spot for comic book superheroes and old school pro wrestling, and Alexis's leotard reminds me of Black Canary or Wonder Woman, or the singlets that were common in women's professional wrestling. So when I see Alexis's new outfit, I just think of her as a comic book hero. I know. I'm as biased as the Bavarian justice system, which, in spite of Varik and Alexis's differences, gives the two one thing that binds them together. In the Brandish manual, as I've said, we learn that Varik is wanted for a crime that he is innocent of. His reason for searching for the pit is because of the promise of treasure within. The corruption of the justice system is what keeps him trapped. We learn from Alexis that the crime he is wanted for is the murder of her master. In this game, we never learn what this is about or what happened, just that Varik is innocent. Alexis is trapped here because she wants justice, and she isn't going to get it. Neither of them will. And if Varik didn't kill her master, I don't think he would kill Alexis, no matter how annoying she can be. The correct choice is to save Alexis. And once you save her, Alexis gives you the key and runs off. The Baramaya key unlocks the door that leads to the backbone, the holding cell of the Aussie Dahaka, the dragon that cursed this land to begin with. The most difficult thing about Dahaka is reaching him, as he floods the long hallway with fire. With high magic endurance, you can just tank the shots, but I did discover a neat trick that you can do. If you move forward into the flame at the exact moment it would move into you, you will bypass it completely, and this works with all ranged attacks. I thought this was intentional at first, that the game was rewarding your movement and treating it as you carefully dodging the fireball, but I have since learned that this is a bug. The game has no way of detecting the collision of multiple objects when they are between squares, so it doesn't, and speedrunners absolutely abuse this. Whatever, I like my explanation better. Once you make it to Ozzy, just pick a head and swing away. This fight is not great. It is way too easy considering the weight that this fight should have. This is the font of the curse that corrupted the land, the being that created all of the monsters down here. But Dahaka doesn't do much to live up than that. His bark is worse than his bite and his breath, and he won't last long before falling. Despite Ozzy Dahaka laying the curse, the game isn't over yet, as you get one last key and the ultimate weapon, the Planet Buster sword, which not only has the highest attack, it is also unbreakable. I doubt they called it Planet Buster for nothing, and it will now replace whatever other weapon Varik has been using. Although there isn't much left to do. There's only one more detour on your path to the end, one more room that contains a dusty tome that holds the last written words as the Old Kingdom fell to darkness. How many seasons have passed since this, our land, was swallowed by the earth? There is no one left that can answer that now. Our beloved land, along with this cursed king, will spend eternity forever in darkness. We wait. We wait for the one that will free us. free us from our cursed fate. I don't think it is by accident that the land is described as beloved, while the king is merely cursed. But his curse is what keeps us here. One last room, one last hallway, and here we are. This last oddly futuristic room is where King Berebus' monster form resides, and this last fight goes all out. Berebus shifts back and forth along the back wall, shooting very powerful fireballs at you. There are also these odd pillars that shoot lasers and more fireballs of their own. It's very easy to die before you even get to see the king, especially since every time he hits you, you will level up your magic resistance, which of course locks your button inputs for a second. A second that feels like an eternity when you are on fire. On top of this are these green bubbles that float around that, if they hit you, will teleport you back out of the room, forcing you to run the gauntlet again. Also, those fireballs the king is shooting at you can bounce off of the pillars and shoot back up towards the king, so if you're too focused on all of the nonsense in front of you, they can bounce back and hit you in the back. Let's see, what else? Oh, unlike Ozzy Dahaka, only the center of the king is vulnerable and only to melee attacks, so you need to keep the rhythm and move when he does. And you know what? Why not? He also shoots floor spikes in front of his head if you linger there too long. This may sound like a lot for one room, and that's because it is. And the Super Nintendo can barely handle all of this and has a very noticeable slowdown. With all of this together, the only thing I can say about this fight is that it's awesome. This is by far my favorite part of the game. If the last 3 floors of the fortress were a final challenge to test you on the dungeon crawling aspects of the game, this fight is here to fully test you on the combat part. You need to be like Shadow the Hedgehog and lock the fuck in, as the king will punish any mistakes. But the pacing of the fight, and even the slowdown, helps with this, meaning it's not about how quick your reflexes are, but how well you can keep track of everything going on at once and how methodically you can pick your moment to attack and when to reposition. And you need to keep this up for a while, as even with maxed out stats, it takes a while, but eventually the king will fall. The curse is broken, the living nightmare that is the fortress fades away, and Varik can finally leave. I spoke earlier about how Alexis was the breakout character of Brandish, and it makes sense. She has the personality that provides relief and weight to the melancholic themes of the game, but it wouldn't be fair to leave Varik out of that discussion. By all means, he should be the most generic action protagonist to ever do it. He doesn't talk, he doesn't even have a face, ostensibly to make it easier for the player to put themselves in his leather boots. But the artist did take the time to give his sprite a little booty, and then doubled down on the cutscene artwork. Do you think this was intentional? Players are going to want to roleplay as a stoic warrior, with a thick ass. The kind of ass that witches see and try to put a hex on it, but it just bounces off, like a quarter. Alright, bring it back. But, like with Adel and Ys, who also gets wrongly painted with the generic protagonist brush, the actions that Varik takes in the prologue and throughout the game show that he is someone who is very pragmatic about his situation, which makes the raven-haired Varik to be an ideological opposite of the colorful Adel Kristen. Varik does not seek adventure, merely a way to make money. Whether or not he tries to break the curse to free the other people trapped in the pit, or just himself, is unknown. Varik is not an adventurer. He is a bounty hunter, a mercenary. To pull back a little, there were a couple of Brandish stories written by Tadashi Hayakawa that expand on Varik's history a little, and it is outright stated that the only deciding factor on which side of a conflict Varik would join was whichever side was paying him more. Even if he felt the other side was morally correct, it didn't matter if they couldn't pay. If the side Varik was on happened to be good, then that was just a nice bonus. Unlike Adel, Varik is only here to do the job and get out, not to make friends. In Brandish, killing the king is a means to escape. Even though Varik is probably glad that everyone else is saved, saving everyone else is just happenstance. As for the king and the dragon, they also contrast nicely with the antagonist of Ys. The villain of Ys is Dharm, a satanic embodiment of evil that corrupts humanity. The two antagonists of Brandish are the dragon Dahaka and the fallen king Berebus. But in order to truly understand the antagonist, we first need to quickly have a talk about the metaphysical concepts of the ancient Persian Zoroastrianist religion. Dahaka is not a Falcom creation. What exactly Dahaka is difficult to describe and may actually be an untranslatable concept, but to greatly simplify, if all of reality is a never-ending battle between the truth and the lie, Dahaka is the spawn of that lie. He is the simultaneous embodiment of greed and evil, and is usually portrayed as a three-headed dragon, as he is here. But Dahaka is not just any dragon, as he is part of one of the world's oldest known religions and the closest link to the Indo-European religion that several other religions are theorized to have descended from. He may be the proto-dragon that all other dragons of legend are descended from. In later Iranian retellings, Dahaka was no longer viewed as a dragon, but as an evil king whose tyranny over the world lasted for centuries. In all incarnations, Dahaka is trapped in a large pit underground, where he slowly gnaws at his chains until one day he can break free and cause the end of the world. If that sounds familiar, that's because it is. Now, I'm sure you're wondering why this ties to Brandish. For all we know, Hayakawa could have just pulled a random mythological monster from some book he found. And that's actually true. There was a book of random mythological stories floating around the Falcom dev rooms, and they liberally took from it. As did many Japanese game developers. It's no secret. It is clear how much this influenced what we see in Brandish. But what truly fascinates me, the reason why I bring this up, is how they changed it. Dahaka is separated from his evil king alter ego, and instead of Dahaka being the evil influence that corrupts the world, he's benevolent, a guardian of the people. It is rather the human king, or human nature, that corrupts the dragon and then the world around them. The story of Brandish is not one of idealistic struggle, but one of power and corruption, and Varik meets the challenge with a pragmatism that is born from someone seeing the world as it is, not as they wish it would be. And that pragmatism is evident throughout the story and plays out here in the ending. Varik does not get a satisfying conclusion. He was brought to the pit because he was looking for a way to deal with the bounty that was unjustly put upon him. That bounty is still there. The corrupt king on the surface world is still in charge and still corrupt. While it may be possible for you to grind out enough money and items to pay off Varik's bounty, I honestly don't believe that Varik would return to Bavalia, because Varik knows what the score is. There is no point in being innocent if innocence is just a tool used by the corrupted elite. But that money gives Varik the one thing he was actually looking for: the freedom to leave. But there is one last thread to pull. If you save Alexis, she'll catch Varik outside, approaching from behind, I'll note, and she'll act as if she's going to attack, but since Varik saved her, she's willing to call the whole thing square and walks away. While neither of the two found what they were originally searching for in the pit, they did discover the one thing that they needed: an end to the cycle of violence. And both can leave satisfied. That Varik sure knows how to leave the ladies with a smile on their face. Oh, come on. You're not even being subtle about it. Look at that thing. And note how the light part of the road guides your eye to his dummy, thick. It's like a muse. I mean, you see this and you turn around and start making Undertale. I'm the only one brave enough to mention it, unlike you cow. Brandish released to moderate success in Japan. I can't find any numbers, but considering that Falcom immediately set out to produce several sequels shows that they were proud of what the game became. Unfortunately, Falcom could not duplicate this success anywhere else. Due to then President Kato not wanting anybody to work on anything other than the PC-98, this meant that no one could do the work to get the game to run on DOS and potentially be translated to be released overseas. Eventually, 2 other companies would step in to port the game to consoles, with NEC porting the game to the PC Engine CD, and would give the game CD quality audio and would even make fully animated cutscenes for the game and would provide full mouse support with the PC Engine mouse attachment. I have put some of these cutscenes in this video as they are absolutely worth seeing. This version would stay in Japan, however, and the only version to ever be translated into English would be the Super Nintendo version, which was ported by Koei of all companies. I admire the work that was done on this console port. I was blown away with the technical aspects of the Super Nintendo port. I didn't know how exactly they made the turn the world mechanic work, but I was still impressed. As with the original, I now know this means they store 4 versions of the map and 4 sides of every sprite in RAM, and swap the maps and associated tiles every time you push the turn button. This would also require the game to keep track of every NPC's coordinates and to shift them onto the new maps accordingly, which probably explains why the developers chose the movement system that they did. A closed, grid-based movement where everyone's coordinates would be square and easy to calculate would make it much easier to transition them than if everybody had full range of movement. And this transition happens instantaneously, almost too fast. I'm sure someone who is more knowledgeable on the technical aspects of the Super Nintendo can explain how this isn't really that crazy, but this blew my mind when I saw it, and it shows how creative programmers were in trying to fit 3-dimensional gaming onto 2-dimensional consoles, and without using the more expensive cartridge chipsets. This is all in hindsight, however. At the time, the game was not very well received. It wasn't panned, but reviewers at the time could not get past the graphics. By the time the game came out in 1995, the game was already 4 years old, and the graphics weren't cutting edge in 1991 either. 4 years may not seem like such a long time these days, but to put it in perspective, back then that was the gap between Eyes of the Beholder and Diablo.
Prepare yourself to serve my master.
Or Wolfenstein 3D and Quake. On consoles, that's the gap between Street Fighter 2 and Tekken. For reference, this game came out just 2 to 3 months before Chrono Trigger and Super Mario RPG, and 2 months after Donkey Kong Country. One magazine even called the game an ugly duckling that may become something greater if you're willing to give the game any time. It turns out that even back then, graphical fidelity went a very long way, and even though the gameplay mechanics were noted for being interesting at the time, it just couldn't save the game. The camera in particular was criticized for being too jarring to deal with, and back then and even today I've seen people wonder why they never tried to use the Super Nintendo's Mode 7 to try to add more 3D-esque effects to liven up the game. I don't like this criticism, as that would take a lot more effort than just adding 3D.mode_7 to your game files, but I think the best example of how adding more and more graphical effects can fundamentally change the game is in the 2009 remake, Brandish The Dark Revenant. Releasing on March 19, 2009 in Japan and taking a whopping 6 years to make it to North America on January 13, 2015, Brandish The Dark Revenant was a then-modern remaster of Brandish for the PlayStation Portable. Aiming to smooth off the rough edges the game had and update the graphics and gameplay for a new audience. With fully 3D graphics, updated art, and several quality of life features, such as the ability to set a respawn point at any time without making a save, a mapping feature that lets you set your own marks. For example, it makes the puzzle on Labyrinth 5 through 7, where you have to fall through multiple pits in one go, very easy, as you can mark the correct pit and then move up a level in your map and mark the correct spot again. And these quick use slots that let you hold up to 3 items at once instead of just 1. This version of the game has been called the definitive version of Brandish. And there is some good reason for this. The soundtrack for the game has been overhauled and sounds fantastic. And some of the story beats with Della, yes, Della, the original names have been restored, have been expanded and new ones have been added. Della seems a lot more competent in this version, with one cutscene doing an effective job at showing just how scary of a sorceress she really is. And the writing now shows her losing her patience with Ares as time goes on. She starts with just wanting to capture Ares in the beginning, but as it goes on and she mistakenly assumes it is Ares setting all of the traps she wanders into, she stops wanting to capture Ares alive and openly ponders roasting his severed head. This is about it for the positives for me, however. The gameplay is still Brandish at its core, and I like it for that. But this is where we get into the unforeseen consequences of adding graphical flourishes and changes to a game that wasn't designed to have them in the first place. I'll start with the one change that I'm sure most people will disagree with me the most on. The camera. Even back on the Super Nintendo, critics disliked the camera. It was too jarring and sudden and could give people motion sickness. I admit the first time I played the game, I could not understand what was happening for about 5 seconds, but still, if it makes you feel physically ill, then it is a problem, and the new camera fixes that issue. My problem is that it is too slow. It may not seem like it at first. It is definitely more noticeable when you play one right after the other, but as the game goes on and more of the puzzles and combat scenarios require you to turn left and right, it becomes apparent. There are also puzzles, such as this one in the ruins, where you need to look around this corner to know when to stop this pillar trap, but the new camera gets cut off before you can see the trap. This slowness in the form of graphical enhancements continues into the combat itself. In the original, Ares will swing his sword the same way every time you hit the button, and he swings very quickly as well, so you learn your own rhythm to the combat. In the remaster, they have added much more animated swings. They look neat, sure, but they also have different speeds, with the second swing being slower than the first, and the third to be even slower and to leave you vulnerable after it finishes. I don't understand this. It slows the combat down, especially with shielded enemies, as they love to hide behind their shield, and you now have less time to punish them when they do attack. Combine this with the slower camera, making it harder to flank enemies, and some of these simple encounters can take much longer than they should. The obvious answer would be to just use magic, but that has also been slowed down. The rate at which your mana recharges is slower, so you will use spells less. And I don't just mean the rate at which it replenishes as you walk around, it also recharges much slower while you rest. There are many mana potions you can use, but I still don't understand why this change was made. And with the changes made to potions, they aren't exactly reliable to use in combat anyways. That change being, of course, that they are slower to use, no longer being instantaneous. This sort of change makes some of the boss fights, such as the ninja boss, much more difficult. Speaking of boss fights, some of them have been changed as well, introducing multiple stages to the fights. For example, the boss at the foot of the tower now requires you to hit his minions back at him to knock his armor off, and his pattern and speed changes in the different stages. The biggest change is with the final boss fight. You get an opening cutscene of the vile, cursed king threatening to curse Ares before the fight begins. The first stage of the fight is similar to the original, although it takes place on a smaller platform. The second stage is where it all starts to fall apart. The king now puts a protective shield in front of himself that blocks all damage. You have to break these 3 pillars that power the shield, dodge the super beam of death, and try to hit him before he gets his shield back up. This is more than a little tedious, especially since the window is so small. If you stop to heal and cast double magic, you will barely have time to get any hits in before the shield comes back up, and you have to do it all over again. The third stage of the fight is with the king himself, and feels like a bad combination of the Dark-backed and Darm fights in Ys 1 and 2. The king constantly moves around the room while continuous lightning bolts strike the ground, so you need to chase the king down to get a few hits and run away when you see him charge up. It's a boss fight that relies on constant movements and strikes, working with a system that intentionally does everything slower than you want it to. The original boss fight was a great final challenge for the combat system that rewarded fast thinking as opposed to fast reactions. The toughest part of the fight was getting to the boss, then finding the rhythm to move in between the boss's weapons, and knowing when to back away and avoid the teleporters. It highlighted what the game did well. I don't think that is true here. I think this new boss fight just highlights how much slower Ares is. It's definitely a more challenging fight, and I don't think that it is necessarily broken or unfair, but when I beat the Super Nintendo version, I immediately reloaded my save so I could redo the fight. That was how much I enjoyed it. With this one, I don't ever want to do it again. Which is a shame, as there is one hell of a great reward for beating the game. Loading your clear save restarts the game in Della mode, a mode which, as the name implies, lets you play through a new 10-level dungeon as Della Dellan. The levels are much harder than the base game, and Della is far more reliant on her magic and mobility than Ares. Makes sense. So while I don't like the changes for the original game, this new mode shows that the team still had the old magic when it came to making new levels. I would love to see them make a new game. They've done a great job at rehabbing Della's worst moments, so if she got her own story, I wouldn't complain. Or even if we finally got the remaining Brandish games to be translated to English, I can put up with the new style to finally get a chance to see them. But sadly, that probably isn't going to happen. I don't know the exact sales numbers, but this version of the game evidently didn't sell very well, and all plans for a continuation were dropped. That may have been Brandish's one shot at a revival, and it flopped. What is really frustrating about this is that it seems like it may not have been the fault of the game, as the game was well reviewed. So what was the problem? The problem is that the game came out in 2009. In Japan. It came out in North America in 2015, still on the PSP a full 3 years after the Vita came out, which means that most people probably played it through the Vita's backwards compatibility. We really never learn, do we? Obviously, I have complaints about this version of the game, although I am self-aware enough to note that it may just be because I played the Super Nintendo version first. I played The Dark Revenant only a week after replaying the Super Nintendo version for the 4th time, so it was difficult for me to not focus on the differences. If you haven't played Brandish before and The Dark Revenant looks more interesting to you, or if the camera and controls of the original are too off-putting, then by all means play the newer version. It's still a worthy experience. Regardless of your thoughts on Brandish, you could look at the people that worked on it and see them as the fighters that didn't make it. They fought to make the company a better place, and lost. Things did not really improve at Falcom throughout the 1990s, it merely continued. It would be easy to view the efforts of Hayakawa and Fujii as that of a bravely flickering candle. To us in the West, Falcom all but disappeared as they retreated internationally, with only Brandish and Popful Mail crossing the ocean during the 90s. Even now, when we talk about Falcom, we usually talk about the golden age in the 80s and the modern Renaissance, and there is good reason behind that, but I don't want to discount the importance of the work that was done here or the difficulties that those developers would have faced. Something I find interesting when contrasting Brandish with Ys is how both games tackle the same issue with drastically different methods. Miyazaki and Hashimoto's Ys is about greed, as is Hayakawa and Fujii's Brandish. But the magical silver in Ys, the greed, is shown as being something that could create wonderful things, but that it is ultimately evil and that if we aren't careful, it will one day destroy us. It takes someone like Adol Kristen, who is shown to be noble and idealistic, someone who wants nothing more than to travel the world to discover all of its beauties and mysteries, to be able to use the magical silver just long enough to destroy it, and then, most importantly, to walk away from it. In Brandish, greed won't one day destroy us. It already did. This is the world that Varik lives in, and this was probably how a lot of people at Falcom felt around the time they were making Brandish, and for a long while afterwards. But Falcom wasn't run by mercenaries who were only there to make a paycheck. What little snippets of information we get shows that many people who rushed to work at Falcom, even as people were running away, was because of one simple thing. They loved the Falcom games. This next generation came up as fans of Ys and Dragon Slayer and Xanadu, and that love shows through in the games themselves. Brandish does not play like any other Falcom game, but it still feels like a Falcom classic. The care still shows through. The legendary balance, the emphasis on the music, and perhaps most importantly, the care and respect for the player. And Hayakawa and Fujii would carry that torch, or flickering candle, onto their future projects. And those projects, such as Legend of Heroes 3: The White Witch, would inspire the next generation in turn. As Hayakawa, Fujii, Tenmon, and countless others were leaving the company in the 2000s, there were others such as Kondo who were coming in, greatly inspired by the work of Hayakawa and Fujii, and hoping that one day they could do something that would be even half as good. And they did. But I don't want it to seem like Brandish is just a footnote, the launch pad for the talent behind 90s era Falcom, or the fun trivia note for one of modern gaming's surprise successes. Yes, I am intentionally burying this here near the end of the video, but Toby Fox, the creator of Undertale and Deltarune, was a big fan of Brandish and was inspired by the music and stylistic art choices that the game has. One of his first big projects was a mod of Earthbound that incorporated Brandish characters, and supposedly his hit song Megalovania was inspired by a song in Brandish 2. I don't mean to slight this fact, but the truth is that in order for Brandish to be an inspiration and launchpad for so many other successful things, it had to be good. That's the little secret that gets lost in the shuffle. Brandish is a difficult game to love, and it's not for everybody. But for those of us that the game is for, there's nothing else like it. No other story is told like this. No other game plays the same way. Trust me, I looked and couldn't find anything other than the sequels that we never got. As I said earlier, it is difficult to not draw parallels with the story of Brandish in the history of Falcom. The once successful kingdom brought down by an insatiable greed, the great city left to ruin, its people left in despair, as the best among them, those that fought hardest for change, disappeared. But this is all setup, the pre-story, the explanation. But that's not the point of the game. Brandish is not a game about failure, depression, or mere survival. The game begins with Varik already at the lowest, where the first thing that happens is when Varik picks himself up from the ground and takes his first step to climb out of that pit. Brandish is about perseverance. This would normally be the spot where I run the game credits, but this version of the game has no credits. The PC versions have credits, but they weren't translated to English. Classic Falcom. My one last thing to end on... No, wait. I just want to add that I think that Della Dellin wears a fine perfume that smells like honey and jasmine, and Aries smells like cedar and vinegar. I don't have to explain shit to you about that. My one last thing to end on is about this. All of this. This video was a nightmare production. It was supposed to be out at the end of February, but then things went crazy at my work. As in, there was an investigation and people got fired kind of crazy. I have also had to record the audio multiple times, some sections at least 3 times. I am sorry about the quality of the tower section. It was the best of the original recordings, so I saved it. Now I'm not so sure, but it's too late to go back. I need to move on. Luckily, it was all a learning experience. I think I did figure out what kept breaking, so it shouldn't be as much of a problem going forward. I say this because when I started this channel, there was 3 videos I wanted to make, and I was going to use that to see if all of this was something I even wanted to do. I knew absolutely nothing about making YouTube videos. I had never recorded my own voice before, I had never opened video editing software, and I had not touched Audacity since I was in high school, and I was, and still am, an absolute novice at Photoshop, or whatever the GIMP equivalent of that word is, and I'm sure that all of that shows through. Every single step has been a learning experience, but it has been really fun. Before I uploaded the Pac-Man video, I told my girlfriend that it was only ever going to get 12 views, of which 9 of them would be me, but I didn't care because it would be my Pac-Man video, something that I did and uploaded for the world to ignore at their pleasure. So I am completely gobsmacked that that video has cracked over 200 views, and that the East video, of which I told my girlfriend would get less than the Pac-Man video, because, come on, like, East is East, but Pac-Man is Pac-Man. But the East video has somehow done even better. Look, don't ask me for predictions. I'm not good at predictions. All this to say thank you to everyone that has stuck through this overly long video about Brandish or anything else I have put on here. I hope you enjoyed them, learned something, or at least were entertained by my terrible jokes. Despite all of the troubles, it has been really fun. In fact, I've had so much fun in this pit with Brandish that I think I need to dig deeper. I heard there's a giant world-eating snake down there, and I kind of want to see what that's all about.